We'll have Jason get started here.
Great. Hello, everyone, again. I'm Jason Jordan with the Center for Transportation Excellence. For those of you who were here yesterday, you saw a bit of my presentation. I'm going to take a little bit of a different slant at the information. But before I do any of you remember Oscar Goodman, the former mayor of Las Vegas? Did you ever see anything about him? He self-described former mob attorney. That's how he ran his campaign. And he always used to show up with at public appearances with Las Vegas showgirls in tow. And he just had a huge personality. A few years ago, I was on a program in Las Vegas talking about transit, and he was the lead-in speaker. So he shows up, he walks in the room, he's got showgirls, he's handing out chips for the casinos, he's hugely funny, he's just been on TV. He gives this hysterically funny, very entertaining speech, and then they turn to me. And I'm reminded of that because I promised myself years ago that I would never go after R&R spoke at transit meetings, and now here I am. Yeah, you did. You owe me the glass of water because it's always hard to follow up all the terrific insights as well as the creative stuff that R&R that they showed you and that they do around the country. Usually my presentations are filled with ripping off all of their work and pointing it out. And you'll actually see some of that in here. I'm not going to talk about it, but you'll see some of the same stuff. So again, the Center for Transportation Excellence, let me just sort of set this up by reminding you a little bit about CFT, who we are and what we do. We were established back in 2000 as this trend of local option referenda to support transit investment was really beginning to take off and emerge. And we were set up to be a clearinghouse of information about these campaigns, to try to understand what's happening out there, to catalog the individual campaigns, and then, of course, as part of that, to learn some of the lessons that one community showed us through their success or their lack of success, and pass that along to other communities as they begin their effort to generate locally dedicated resources at the ballot box. So what we try to do very much, both in terms of our work with individual communities, but also just more broadly, is to promulgate those ideas and those lessons from various campaigns. I talked about some of those lessons as part of my presentation yesterday, so you'll see some pieces in here that are a little bit repetitive, so I apologize for that in advance. But please, the goal here, I think, today is to give you a chance to do a bit of a deeper dive on some of those concepts. So I will take questions. I'll try to be pretty quick with running through my checklist here of concepts and ideas so that we can save some time to get in and answer more specific kind of tactical questions that you might have. But if there's something top of mind, we're informal here, so please, as you did in the last presentation, feel free to stand up, raise your hand, shout out a question. I'm happy to stop and pause. So what are the hallmarks of success? And again, just to sort of reset from yesterday, over the 12 years that we have been monitoring elections, these things have a 71% pass rate. In the last election year, we were at 79%. So there's both a rich pool of places that have been successful, but also a bit of a model. I mean, when you have that many campaigns and that level of success, and you look at all of them in totality, you can begin to see a little bit of what a playbook is for that success. But the one caveat, of course, and it's been mentioned several times already, but it bears repeating, I think, is that while these are general guidelines for how to be successful and what the good strategies are, every place is different, every place is distinctive, every campaign is unique in its own way. So, I'm going to generalize here, but part of your work, both today and as you sort of take this information back, is to figure out how do we refine these strategies and these ideas in the very specific context of where we are in Detroit and what we're trying to accomplish. Starting early has been referenced, and I think it really is critical. The places that succeed almost always have been engaged in the community for an extended period of time in the run-up to a campaign. Campaigns don't spring sort of fully formed and then they're successful. There has to be this sort of pre-campaign education and outreach, and it can take a range of different formats. In some cases, it's what the agency itself may be doing. We saw the UTA spots, their ability to message and manage the reputation of that agency in the community. It can take the form of events like this. It can take the form of traditional town hall public meetings to talk about the plans for the future. It needs to be a mix of all of those things, frankly. Engaging the public early on so that people understand what you're doing, what you're proposing, and getting them engaged, building that coalition. That exercise that Tom engaged us all in earlier today really is such a foundational piece because you can't do all of the things that are in this laundry list that I'm going to show you unless you've built that strong coalition in advance to do the work. Information and money are, of course, the lifeblood of any political effort. That might be an unfortunate reality in some instances, but it is a reality. So the earlier you can get out there to poll or other sorts of less formal mechanisms to really understand public opinion is really important. Marie, did you?
Yeah, right away, because this whole polling issue, and I want you, are you going to talk about polling a little bit later? Or?
Let's talk about it right now.
So we've never done any that we know of, really, with regards to the transit, if we haven't been CTFE polls. And so can you just talk a little bit about that, like what it is, why you do it, and the mechanics of polling?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of ways you can approach that. I mean,
Or why you would do it.
yeah. Well, the reason why I think you would do it is that as you're thinking about the context of potentially going to the voters, or even potentially going for a legislative win, it's important to establish some baselines, to understand where people are before you start really aggressively messaging, aggressively organizing politically, and that you build in some intervals where you can figure out what's working or what's not working. Tom mentioned in the work that they did in St. Louis, they did advanced polling that, you know, actually they decided to go forward in the face of a number that wasn't where a lot of the polling experts wanted them to be. You can make various strategic decisions, but that information is really important so that everybody's working from a sort of standard baseline of what does this region feel about various options, about the plan, about the agencies. Testing individual messages, whether that's done through a poll or focus groups or other approaches, is also really important because you know, it's very tempting and easy in a sense to get into a room like this with people who are committed and engaged, true believers in the wisdom of moving forward, and we start throwing out messages, and they all seem resonant to us. They may or may not be once you actually get out and start testing them with people that you're trying to move who aren't coming to the table with the same set of assumptions that we all might have about the value of public transportation. So I think it's just helpful for making a whole range of the early strategic decisions that a campaign or a coalition will need to make, right? There are a lot of variables in that, and certainly we're not a polling. The question was, how much do they cost? What's the cost of a poll? So that's going to be very dependent on all the variables. So how many questions are you asking? How large is your sample size? These are all going to depend. Is it an online poll? Are you doing phones? I mean, these are all the different pieces that are going to affect the cost of your polling. In general, they're not inexpensive, but they're really invaluable if they're done well. And that's the other thing: hire people who know what they're doing to poll. Right? Don't try to do it yourself.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
We have a survey. But it may be preliminary to a poll as you characterize it. But I want to introduce Claudia Bernasconi. Claudia, why don't you stand up so people see who you are? She is the lead investigator in a project along with Megan Owens, And what we've just completed is a survey of public opinion regarding transit in southeastern Michigan. And we had, 315 responses? It was a pilot. It wasn't large enough to be statistically valid for the region, but we wanted to get some experience and some input on what their response to various issues were and their feelings about various issues, and whether they're riders and whether they've ridden here, whether they've ridden somewhere else, and a lot of things like that. And Megan's going to take this and use it to inform her educational program, and she showed this yesterday, that she will be, during the summer, rolling out some educational programs to just get general support. So we're trying to get ahead of it in that regard. And then in the fall, we're going to do a much more comprehensive survey, and we just contracted with a survey company that knows what they're doing, and has done a number of surveys in a variety of areas, and we'll do a much more comprehensive survey. What's the target? We want to get at least 800 complete for the fall. So we are trying to do that, and that will hopefully inform in a general way. It's not going to be messaging, but it's going to inform messaging. And we're going to split it by location. If people give us political preference or party, that we will get that. We'll get riders and non-riders, and we'll get a lot of different splits that will help us with messaging later. So I just want to let people know that there is this underway, and it's supported by the Mineta National Transit Research Coalition.
I know there are a couple of questions. Let me just make one quick comment there. I think that is terrific. And by saying that, I think you need to do early polling and hire a pollster. I didn't mean to minimize at all the sort of value of other kinds of things that are going on. And in fact, I would say that part of your work is to sort of put together this mosaic of information from a variety of different sources, right? Because you may get certain organizations who are taking one slice of the region or the electorate in one way, you take it in another, you put those pieces together, and you sort of come up with a larger profile and answer a lot more questions. You may also find, in terms of dealing with a cost issue, that there are organizations who are regularly polling who maybe, as you start talking to some of those partners, if they're going out in the field, your ability to insert 2 or 3 transit-related questions in a survey somebody else is paying for is a very cost-effective way to continue to build your information base. Yes.
I would add to that. I know about 4 different transit-related surveys, focus groups, and so it may be a step just to find out who's already doing what, who already has plans to do something. So the 4, I would say, with our Regional Elder Mobility Alliance funded by the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, about a year and a half ago, we did some very small written questionnaires with the help of Data Driven Detroit, so we have that. More recently, we did 4 focus groups looking at seniors, boomers, and their attitudes, perceptions about regional transit, and again, small but still effective. The Skillman Foundation has a youth transit learning community, and there's some considerable work and research done around that. And then SIMCOG did onboard surveys about a year and a half, 2 years ago for all the transit providers in about 11 counties. So we have a considerable body of existing work. So it's
one of the first steps that you may want to take, and it really goes kind of hand in glove with the discussion about coalition building, is to really do an asset inventory. Just simply to ask people who are in your coalition about the information assets that they already have in place. Because simply identifying all of those pieces, I mean, you rattled all 4 or 5 very specific initiatives already underway, already funded, people are already engaged in, wheels that do not need to be reinvented by this coalition. Understanding that piece first. I mean, in a way, before you, go into the field with a poll, certainly, or before you do these other things, simply sitting down and making that list. So whoever gets charged with the outreach to those groups that you all brainstorm, that needs to be part of what's on their request list. We want you to come to the meetings, but also tell us what you're doing. Tell us what's going on. They may be looking at a slice that's only one piece of the larger targets that you have, but it's important, and cataloging that. I've said to a few people, in this whole campaign business, I mean, it's just a mantra that if it isn't written down, it doesn't exist. So when we say things in meetings, or we're having conversation about all the wonderful polling information that's out there, if nobody's cataloging that so that you can come back to it later on and say, now did we follow up? Do we have that data? Did we take that data and put it into our evaluation? Then it doesn't happen, right? Because people forget, they're well-intentioned, but there's a lot going on and stuff gets missed. So do be sure that people are charged with capturing some of that in a very explicit way. Yeah, question, comment? I think
Just wanted to add, in addition to the surveys, Ruth mentioned that in Washtenaw County, AATA has done very extensive polling too.
Well, and I was going to add,
You haven't gotten past your first slide yet.
yes. Is it on? Okay. I was going to add, keep in mind the difference between surveys and polling. At some point, you want to poll likely voters, people who are actually going to show up at the polls to find out what their views are. So a survey might help you, but if those people aren't going to vote, or you're not going to be able to get them to vote, then that skews the information that you're using when it comes to a campaign. So there's all, as Jason said, there's a lot of things that need to be done and at different stages.
Yeah, good point. And likewise, I mean, the other point here, talking about information and gathering all that, do be thinking about the capital side of all this. It all costs money. I don't think you have to put a hard target on, well, this is what the campaign component will cost, but an awareness that at some point, if you do go to the ballot, there is a shift where you are, having to staff and run and manage an actual campaign, whether that's a C3 educational component or whether it's more on the C4 electoral side. They both require money. So setting yourself some goals, or at least again making that part of your conscious thought process and engagement with partners around as you build that coalition is important too. Yes, please.
This is also a problem with people at the voting poll may not understand or don't care, but my suggestion is soon everybody will be listening to radios or any media network such as Facebook, any internet intervene via help because there may be people who can read but don't understand what they are reading. So that's why I said that if you really want to get to get to the TERS, you really got to look at it both ways. Visualization and verbal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important. In fact, there's a point later on a future slide in here that talks about sort of how all this fits into a comprehensive approach to message development and message delivery. And part of that is figuring out, how you reach people in different ways and at different levels. At a certain point in your planning process, you may have a sort of broad strategic plan for the campaign, but at some point you're going to segment that and start focusing more specifically on things like how are we going to communicate our values and our messages. And it's not always the same message to the same individuals, and it's not always the same tools that you use. That's an outstanding point. Yeah. But you know what? Actually, if I don't make it all the way through every bullet point, I'm okay with that. I think this conversation is more helpful for you in some ways than me yakking at you. But I will try to keep it moving. The next point is one that I made yesterday. Happily, a couple of other people have made it as well. And that's about the specific benefit proposition behind everything that you do. What's in it for me? What are the values of the region that you're speaking to? Answering that question. I know from having spent a fair amount of time working with transit agencies and transit advocates that there is a temptation sometimes to talk broadly, particularly when you're thinking in a regional context about all of the benefits that you're providing, all the different aspects of the network, and we think multimodally and all of those things. But ultimately, you have to be talking very narrowly and specifically about what people are going to see and feel and experience as a result of the investment that you're asking them to make. It also speaks to a sense of transparency and accountability, that you're being entrusted with tax dollars and people are buying something specific with that investment, which I mentioned yesterday. I think it's helpful to just pose that question to yourselves. What are the specific benefits we expect individuals in this region to accrue if they do what we suggest that they do, right? And catalog those things. Obviously, once you get to the stage of talking about specific projects, that's a different kind of conversation. But this idea of being able to quickly and readily list out for people what they're buying is incredibly important. And actually, you will find will then inform a lot of other decisions that you make. How you position this, how you talk about it, all of those things. The next point I want to make is that there's typically, in most of the trajectory of these campaigns, there's a sort of interesting choreography that has to be put together where you have the public agency with a very specific role. They are likely going to be developing the project plan. They're going to be dealing with things like design and engineering. They're going to be handling mandatory kind of public outreach as part of this planning process. And they're obviously not going to run a campaign, right? They're not going to hire a campaign consultant and run ads on television promoting a yes vote on, Prop 123. But they have an important role. Likewise, the campaign is going to come in and start at a certain point in this process with a project planning initiative already underway, with decisions already having been made by the regional body about what's going to be on offer. And there's a dance, if you will, that has to happen as those agencies who can't directly coordinate necessarily, they're not going to sit down at the same table to make campaign decisions, but they have to be working together. One of the really brilliant things I think about the St. Louis story that Tom didn't give himself near enough credit for is how seamless the experience for the voter was in terms of what Metro was doing, what CMT was doing, and what the campaign was doing. Graphically, in terms of messaging, a very sort of nice sequence of activities complementing one another. We have seen other campaigns that, frankly, have had a much rockier road because the agency's off in this direction, the advocates are off in this direction, there's very little coordination, a lot of extra money gets spent, a lot of the advertising that is done isn't as effective as it could be. So while you can't make your agency do specific things and they can't make you do specific things on the campaign side, if everybody is aware of the role, the distinct roles and the complementary roles that each other have to play in this process, everybody will make better decisions. So again, it's one of those things that you just have to keep in the front of your mind as your campaign unfolds. Those lovely black boxes are ads that I would typically show, but a couple of them you've actually already seen. I told you I stole their material, so I'm not going to show those. But I do want to run through some of the points here. Strong champions. We've shown a lot of spots and talked in several different presentations about the role of outside champions in your campaign. They are incredibly important, and it's useful, I think, to think very broadly about who your champions are and understanding the assets that they bring, the constituencies that they are powerful when they are speaking to them. I mean, one of the interesting things about the UTA spots, if you look at a number of them, they're different kinds of folks. So business leaders are effective with some audiences. Religious leaders may be effective with different audiences. Cultural figures, sports figures, effective with different audiences. And you can kind of mix and match a little bit. So you should think about a sort of roster of champions or spokespeople, if you will. And if it's possible to identify a face and voice, if that's useful, again, that's the kind of thing that focus groups, polling can help you get at. What are the positive and negatives of individual types of people that you might be able to recruit. But we do, again, in thinking about as this presentation is entitled, the sort of hallmarks of successful campaigns, very often you will see someone who isn't directly transit affiliated who's the prime spokesperson for the effort, or some group of folks who lend the credibility that they bring with them to the effort. The next point is one that we've done a lot of work on even this morning, which is coalition building and community engagement. There's really no substitute for this. You can run terrific air campaign, if you will. You know, your great ads, great messaging. At some point, you need a ground game. You need people who are out there speaking to their constituencies, who are willing to help you when it gets down to get out the vote efforts, who are willing to do all of the daily pieces of making a campaign happen, and that requires a coalition. Now, you clearly know that. That is a message you've gotten. You wouldn't be sitting here in this room. This event itself wouldn't be happening if you didn't already understand the importance of that. What I would say is that you are now moving to a point where there are a host of sort of coalition operational decisions that you need to be making. Structurally, how are you going to organize yourselves going forward? Who's going to be taking responsibility for different pieces of that coalition plan? What is the point and the purpose that you're trying to achieve? Being, again, intentional and specific about those things will be helpful. Coalitions don't manage themselves. Somebody, somewhere, has to wake up every single day and feel like it's part of their responsibility to move this ball forward, or else the ball won't move forward. One of the challenges of having lots of different organizations who come together and have a conversation is at the end, everyone feels good about it and no one takes responsibility for it. So again, there are lots of different models for that, whether it should be housed one organization or another or a separate group. Those are all things that you need to define for yourselves, and they all come with relative costs and benefits. But again, part of my core message here is be intentional about it, be specific about it, come up with a plan. You know you need a coalition, now make the specific decisions to make that a real reality. The next point is one it's different in different places certainly, but again, a central theme that we see is that the business community typically plays a vital role. Sometimes they're the actual catalyst and engine for starting the conversation in a community. In other places, they're late to the party, but they bring the money. In other places, they're vital for credibility. You know, you have to be able to reach political figures who may have ties to the business community. They need to be involved. They don't necessarily need to be involved in the same way at every stage, but it is critical that you think about the business sector, the private sector involvement. And if you are in a situation, many communities are fortunate enough to have a lead business organization who's willing to take responsibility, the local Chamber of Commerce, the local Economic Development Authority. In other places, for whatever reason, those institutions may be reluctant to take on that leadership role, but there may be individuals within that business community who are willing to either use their influence to move their organization or to get the ball rolling themselves. So there are a lot of ways to approach this. Could be institutional, or it could be a few key sectors and a few key leaders who make all the difference. I mentioned before, you've got a broad campaign plan, but ultimately you end up developing more specific plans around things like communication, outreach, et cetera. One of the things you need a specific plan for, and you took a step forward in that direction with the exercise today, is developing a specific engagement strategy for key constituency areas. Again, we have a tendency, and I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I think it's important to remember, it's easy to sort of identify sectors that we know we need. It's another matter to identify specifically how are we going to engage them and on what timetable. Are we inviting them to the meeting? Are we sending somebody out with a PowerPoint to meetings that they have? Are we showing up? Are we already represented on their leadership structure, and so we're going to push it that way? You just need a strategy. And your audiences, particularly when you're thinking regionally, this isn't just specific to one community, you're thinking about an entire region. That means you're going to have different audiences with different needs and perspectives. You need to be segmenting your engagement and your messaging strategy for meeting people where they are, meeting those organizations where they are. You may have a very different engagement plan for leaders in the city of Detroit versus some of your suburban communities, just as a for instance. And yesterday, when we did the kind of problem identification discussion, you may want to revisit that as you think about different segments and how you may need different messages, different spokespeople, different strategies for approaching them and engaging with them.
And Jason?
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you along the lines of the problem identification, and we kind of came up with a map over here of some of the things that the coalition needs to do. Do you have any specific suggestions for them that you have seen work in other campaigns for building that trust, for establishing a shared vision? Because I think that's part of the early work that the coalition is going to need to do.
Yeah, let me give you one tangible example. We did a fair amount of work in Baton Rouge in a recent election cycle. This was a community had real challenges. The transit agency had terrible approval ratings with the public, a very sharply divided community along class and racial lines. Much of that arising out of in-migration after Katrina from New Orleans. They had significant pressures of various sorts, redevelopment in some areas, and explosive growth in others. They knew that they needed to go to the ballot to make some sort of investment in transit, but the level of trust all around was really low. Everyone was able to identify, hey, this is a problem, but no one trusted the other people to help come up with a solution to the problem. One of the interesting things that happened is that the mayor, who was a big supporter, but also smart enough to realize that he wasn't the guy to be the champion because of baggage and because of issues, he actually set up, I forget the name they gave it, but a blue ribbon commission, right? So it had the official kind of push from a governmental body, but folks were strategically put on that panel to begin to pull into the conversation sort of key voices, but around a table that none of them had to own or control. And then they came out with a report, and then the report became a vehicle for engaging the community in a conversation. As part of that, some organizations who had been sort of on the bandwagon early on sort of used that process, both the development of that document as well as its release and discussion in the community, to really do deep community engagement. So the faith community, for instance, organized specifically around that and began doing engagement, not under the rubric of, hey, let's come talk about transit, but we have all of the issues that we're concerned about as the faith community in Baton Rouge, and we're going to talk about this, and it sort of came up, I don't want to say organically because there was a strategy behind it, but things began to emerge, and then people, once you sort of had that happening in different sectors and around a document that no one felt was particularly politically motivated or wired by one interest group or another, that became a platform that allowed people to kind of coalesce. And then there was less fighting about, should it be a half penny or a whole penny, or should it go into this line or that line? Because then there was a consensus, well, we need to do something, we need to go to the ballot, and then those became more operational decisions. So that's only one approach. I think there are any number of ways, but some of the core lessons there about giving people genuine opportunities to be engaged, and being very cognizant about who's driving and owning the conversation are important as part of the trust building exercise. And also recognizing that for this coalition, transit is the most important thing. But for many of the groups that you need on your side, transit may be one component of their larger vision. So if they're low-income equity advocates, they have a broader vision for what they want to accomplish. That's their mission in life. You have to figure out how can you make transit feel like a legitimate part of what they're already trying to accomplish. So the goal isn't to try to make transit advocacy everybody's core mission. Part of it is, and part of the way you build trust is demonstrating that you're trying to help them advance what they already believe in and want to achieve, and the vehicle for that in this instance is supporting transit, right? So, in terms of some of these things, and I'll be quick because I think I'm belaboring some of this stuff. Identification of values. Much like we recommend that folks go out and poll, they focus group specific messages and to understand, go through a process of really identifying the values of this region, what people care about, how people want to see the region grow and prosper over time, so that you can speak to those things, and also so that you can begin to wrap around your arguments for the benefits of transit around a value structure people already have. Okay, so if you understand that, you know, let's pick one, that people really value family, that family is a sort of core component of what drives people in the decisions that they make here, then that will lead you to a series of decisions you're going to make about the benefits of transit around how it promotes families, helps families succeed and thrive, allows people to have time with their families, helps connect seniors to their children, their adult children. There's all sorts of messages. That's just one, but you can't get to those messages effectively if you don't know what the value proposition is at the beginning of the process. And so thinking about value not just in terms of economic value, not just in terms of a return on investment strategy, but values in terms of what makes people tick, why people live here in the first place, and what they believe is important. I've talked a little bit already about linking your messaging effort together in a comprehensive way, so I won't talk any more about that. I do think social media, yes, is a hugely important element of your communications plan, and we've seen so many new tools and strategies emerge. There's a lot we can learn from candidate elections in this regard, also from interest groups who are very active in the space. You know, I know from having watched the tweets flow about this workshop over the past 2 days that people are definitely engaged in social media. Not going to say much here because we've talked a little bit, very much about sort of the air game and the importance of the ground rank game. But just the point I'll make is that the two need to work together. One of the things that my friends in Atlanta, I think, had some challenges with is that these two got a little bit separate, where they really didn't have as much coordination with a very extensive grassroots operation and a very extensive media operation that just didn't work as well. So again, as you're thinking about how to knit all of this together, that's something to keep in mind. There are critics. There are professional critics of public transportation investment. There are guys who are paid by interest groups, we won't go into the litany of them, who do nothing but go around and try to tear down the arguments that you're going to put forward. Be prepared. This is something CFTE is involved in. APTA has a lot of resources. Other campaigns who've gone through it can tell you about it. But the arguments are not going to be unfamiliar to anybody who's been in this arena. And the answers to those. Now you need to think in your own minds about how proactive do you want to be? Do you want to preempt some of them? Do you want to wait and see if they emerge? But you should be prepared for those critics. The thing I'll say about building a strategy around the local context is sort of doing a bit of what has already begun to emerge, I think, even in the discussion here in this region around the establishment of the RTA, which is understanding the local context, politically what's happening, economically what's happening, how does our effort fit into that? Because a lot of the decisions that you're going to make are going to, in a way, be driven directly by that local context. You know, we talked yesterday, well, should you go as a general election or should you go in a standalone special election? Well, there is no one right answer to that question. It's going to be very context specific. So analyzing that context is going to give you the ability to make good decisions. Professional support, obviously, these campaigns don't run themselves. At some point, you're going to want to engage professionals. And then the last thing I'll say is that you have what I think of as the burden of yes. The political scientists will tell you that when you take ballot language to the voters, the default is no. The default is no. No is status quo, right? It's always easier to run a no campaign than a yes campaign, because if they pull the lever for yes, then they're changing something, right? They have to understand it, they have to believe in it. If they're confused, if there's doubt in their mind, it's easier to default back to no. So that is this particular burden that advocates for measures have. I mean, when we slice and dice our data, the rate, no disrespect for the people who run really terrific renewal campaigns, but even measures that's yes on renewal is a very different hurdle to cross than, hey, here's a new tax for a new investment. That's different. So, you know, many of us have had experience sort of beating back bad things in the world, electorally or legislatively. Just keep in mind that by accepting the challenge of being in this room and accepting the challenge of trying to move transit forward here, you have a special obligation and a special challenge to meet that burden of getting people to yes, and I have no doubt that you'll be able to do that. And with that, I will take any questions or just wrap up.
We actually have to move on to the next speaker. So,
You got it.
hold your questions, write them down.